You're listening to RetRead Podcast. I'm Anna.
I'm Serge, and we're here to talk about books we've read.
Hope you enjoy. Hey Serge.
Hey Anna.
What's up?
We're recording our third episode and our second Fear Street recording. We have a little bit to get into before we get down to the surprise party, which, by the way, was surprisingly interesting. And I would like to talk about flying lessons and other stories.
I just finished it before recording, and it's an anthology of short stories written to promote diversity, geared toward younger kids. So the stories were pretty great. You know, he had characters that were Latino, they were Black, they were Asian, there was LGBT characters, they were characters with disabilities, and it was just nice to see. It was just weird that it was nice to see, because, you know, it's 2017, we're very diverse people, and
it's about time, right?
It's about time.
Thinking about it that way might have been nice to see when I was growing up.
Oh, it definitely would have been nice to see when I was growing up.
But you know what? Maybe you just have to be that generation.
Maybe we're the generation to write for the kids, because we grew up in a time and place where this is something we knew we wanted, so we're here to promote it.
Great.
For the next generation.
And you know what? Thank you to the previous generation that made it possible for us to feel like we can write.
There's some really great stories. The ones that I like specifically were Soul Painting, Secret Samantha, The Rice and Bean Chronicles of Isaiah Dunn, Main Street, and Flying Lessons. There was a book written in verse, which I'm not a big verse person. It was a good story, but I did struggle with it. It's called $76.49. You know, I think since it's geared for middle schoolers, you know, they're still finding what they like and don't like, so it's really good that they're being exposed to this. There was one story, I thought it was beautifully written, and I think it's the best story in the book. It's called The Difficult Path. But it's the same story that I had the most issues with.
Why did you have the most issues with this story?
You know, I said all the books deal with promoting diversity, and all of them take place, except one. One takes place in Spain. This Indian American boy is going on a trip through Europe with his grandma, so obviously that's not in America, but he is Indian American. It does take place in modern times, and all the other stories, you know, are modern as well, except this story. It takes place during a dynasty in China. I want to say it's the Qing dynasty, but I can't be sure.
Wait, did you just say this was your favorite story?
Yes, but I had the most
You had the most problems with it.
Right. I think it's a beautifully written story. I think it's the best story in the book. And had I read it somewhere not in this book, I would not have any issues with it. But I feel, so my problem with this book is this. Like I said, all the other books are modern. All the other books take place in the US except one. But
the other stories.
Right, all the other stories, sorry. This takes place in the past. And, you know, the story, it deals with feminism and the fight that women had to go through back then in China. And, you know, that's a great message. But it's the one story in the entire book that features a Chinese character or an East Asian character. And it feels like everybody else gets to be American. Everybody else gets to feel what it's like to be American. But why not us?
Oh, I see. So I get that. And, you know, it's weird that they would single out East Asians to be the one story that gets to be set outside of America, not having anything to do with America. That's strange, right? Well, why is that? How does it even belong in this anthology?
I mean, it features a Chinese character, but why not Chinese American? There's a lot you can do with Chinese Americans, Korean Americans, Japanese Americans, Vietnamese Americans.
That is kind of strange. I wonder why that happened.
Right. And, you know, this book is about pushing away stereotypes. Now, I embrace my heritage. I am Chinese American. I'm okay with the idea of pushing that we have a history, that we have this in our background. But I feel like in a book that wants to promote this modern feeling, then maybe you shouldn't put a book that is so historical for a group of people. You know, I said this book is for middle schoolers, right? If I were assigned this book in middle school, I would just be embarrassed. It makes me feel that as a Chinese American, I'm not a real American. Because every single group gets an American story except us. For a book for middle schoolers. That's the message I'm getting.
Yeah, and that, I can see you getting really emotional about this, and I feel for you. I think it's a little bit strange. Honestly, what happens when a culture immigrates to America is that you get to start over and you get your own story. East Asians and all other cultures that come here, this is truly a place where people come together and feel like they belong. And that is something we should promote, and that is something we should cherish. And so when we see this one story really fall behind every other story in the anthology, that really stands out, and that seems like a major failing. And so I feel like Ellen O really owes you an apology.
I mean, look, it's a well-written story, and I understand why they have Grace Lin in this book. I know she writes a lot of books for younger kids. She's a Taiwanese American author. And she actually had a really amazing quote. Basically, she said, that hyphen in Asian American can feel like a minus sign. Like each half of the compound we're taking away from the other. But it's not a minus sign, it's a bridge, and it's something that ties us together, and it only makes us stronger. And I feel like she could have written a story that promoted that.
It seems like she really let you down.
She didn't let me down. I would say that, like I said, it is a beautiful story, and is incredibly well written, but
seems to have nothing to do with America. And the fact of the matter is that, it's a book about minorities, and the other minorities felt more American in this book, and that really hurt. And I get that. And I think that selection was, unfortunate. It was an unfortunate selection in an otherwise decent anthology. And so what would you rate that book?
I gave it 4.5 stars out of 5.
Wow, so that's a 5-star review.
That is a 5-star review.
Despite that. So that must mean the other stories were very strong.
They were. I do think they were very, very strong. I think they told a story that had something more to it, and that maybe as a kid you'd read it one way or another, but you would be entertained. So yeah, it's a 5-star book.
And speaking of more diversity for books for kids, after this intermission, why don't we have a little discussion about The Surprise Party. Fear Street, The Surprise Party, second episode of the Fear Street series.
So what's this book about?
This book is about Meg, a girl who is struggling to complete her psychology report while also dealing with the death of her best friend's brother. All of a sudden, Ellen, who has moved away, is coming back into town, and Meg decides to plot a surprise party for her. Her boyfriend and best friend are against it at first, but eventually decide that, okay, whatever, we're gonna do this. And everything comes to a head when they have their party in an abandoned mansion in the Fear Street woods. I mean, give me a break!
So you gave me a general rundown of the plot, but you didn't tell me what the book is about. So let me tell you what the book is about, and I can tell you in one word.
Alright.
Relationships.
Alright.
You want to know what I mean? It's about relationships and how you probably shouldn't get in one unless you actually know something more about the person. And it all goes back to last week where we talked about Cory and Lisa and how they didn't belong together. And guess who makes an appearance in this book?
Cory and Lisa.
And guess how their relationship is?
It's not the best.
It's pretty awful.
It's not going great.
And every other relationship in this book is pretty bad.
Yeah, I have to admit, I was wrong about a lot of things that I said last week, but we're gonna get into that a little bit later. I also have some ideas about what it's about. Meg starts out the book trying to finish her psychology paper, and she tells her mom at one point, hey, if I don't finish this paper, I'm not gonna graduate. I'm gonna have to repeat my grade. At no point does she finish the paper, and not finishing the psych paper, I believe that represents her not understanding her psycho boyfriend.
Well, I mean, I think there's a deeper issue here where psychology is clearly something she does not have a grasp on. That's why she could never finish this paper.
That's true.
She didn't understand the psyche of Tony. She didn't understand the psyche of Shannon. She didn't get Ellen. She didn't get Brian. She didn't get any of these people.
basically what happens is Meg wants to have a surprise party, and somebody else doesn't want her to have it. Now, we know right off the bat
that we will spoil the shit out of this book.
We will. Somebody begins to threaten her. If she has a surprise party, bad things will happen. She gets mysterious phone calls, doesn't know who it's from. Thing is,
she got that note.
Megan is obstinate. The more this person, this mystery person, wants her to not have the party, the more she's determined to have it. That's actually really the plot of the entire book, is her obstinacy. The more she's pushed, the more she pushes back.
Imagine if she had that obstinacy towards her psych paper.
I know, right? She might have graduated, but alas, alack, that might not be the case.
But you know what? Power to Meg, because this psychopath is like sending her a letter written in red crayon, calling her, tries to run her over, and she just goes, I'm throwing my party. I don't care. You can threaten me all you want, but that just makes me want to throw a party. And power to her. And then she goes on full-on Nancy Drew mode and tries to figure out who this person is. She was pretty awful at being Nancy Drew. She didn't figure anything out, but power to her for trying. Makes a suspect list.
Yeah, so the problem with the suspect list is that I agree 75% with her suspect list. But if I was making a suspect list at that same exact moment in time, I would have made a 100% suspect list. And I would have been narrowing down the suspects.
So who was on the suspect list that she had?
So she had Shannon.
Her best friend.
Why would she doubt her best friend? Shannon wasn't enthused about having a surprise party. Her freaking brother died. Basically, within eyesight of this person that's coming back. As far as she's concerned, it's just bad news. She doesn't want to be reminded of this. It's ridiculous. There was some weird shit going on. She doesn't want any of it. She just wants to move on. It's high school. It's understandable, but she has a motive to not want the party. The other people on the list. Okay, we got Brian, Meg's cousin. Brian is acting suspicious. Also, he's a quote-unquote weirdo because
he plays Wizards and Dungeons. Obviously, they couldn't get a trademark for Dungeons and Dragons.
Her third suspect would be Dwayne. The reason she didn't like Dwayne was because she just doesn't like him.
Yeah, but he is kind of creepy.
He is creepy. You know who else is creepy? Tony, her boyfriend.
She's got her love goggles on.
She's got love goggles on because Tony would be on my list along with those four.
Didn't she have Ellen on her list? The girl she wants to throw the party
She does
for?
have Ellen on her list, but you know what? Ellen's reasons for being on the list are, she might not like to be surprised. It's nothing nefarious. It's just she doesn't like surprise parties. I recognize that, but I'm already looking for a murder plot because we read the introductory chapter, and once again the prologue, just like the previous book, gives away the fact that we have a murder on our hands.
You basically witnessed Evan's murder the previous year.
And so, just like the last book, we already know ahead of time there's a murderer. There's somebody that's really happy and ecstatic about the murder.
Well, we know it's a guy that murdered Evan over a girl.
Exactly. And now it's really been narrowed down. That's why I'm really disregarding Ellen. And that's why I'm giving the 75% rating, because she's ignoring Tony. Maybe it's time to talk about the characters.
Let's talk about the characters. So the main character is obviously Meg. And if I were to imagine Meg, I would imagine Velma from Scooby-Doo. She's described as like short-haired, little kid-like.
But honestly, Meg is a hero. As the main character of this story, with everything told from her point of view, she is...
You get the murderer's point of view.
A few times, but you know what? She's so much better than Cory. No, and you know what? No, you get more than the murderer's point of view.
Well, we don't want to get into that yet.
Okay. No, this is a spoiler review.
Alright, so you get the person who doesn't want the party's point of view.
Yeah.
You get the murderer's point of view. You get her point of view.
But she's freaking great. And like, honestly, Cory's an idiot. And she's really only stupid about one thing. And everything else she's incredibly smart about.
Except not writing that psych paper.
Right. And I'm afraid to say she's probably gonna fail out of her grade and have to repeat it. It's really sad. But maybe they're gonna give her a break because of the traumatic experience she went through.
Or maybe she'll just take summer school.
Yeah. You know what? She's probably gonna make it out. Honestly, she seems like a survivor. This girl is unstoppable. Meg, so far, in the entire series, is my favorite. Now, let's get into Tony.
Her boyfriend.
Her boyfriend, yes.
You meet him right away, and he's introduced as someone who's really moody, is really angry, angry, and he complains about everything. Like, he's complaining about his bike pedals and how he needs to get new rubber on it.
Oh
he's
my
complaining
God.
about his chain, and then when his bike breaks down or something, he wants to, like, throw his bike, and he's angry at Meg.
He wants to beat up his bike.
Yeah, and it seems like he's just this crazy, abusive, angry man.
Yeah, that's Tony, and Tony giving a break because he's going through a lot of psychological pain. He doesn't necessarily need to go through, except that he and his two friends, right? He and his two friends were complete idiots. Just complete idiots. And you know what? Let this be a lesson. Why don't we teach basic first aid in high school? That should be a freshman year course.
We do teach basic first aid in high school.
Do we?
Yeah.
Oh, well, these guys didn't take it because guess what? They really dropped the ball. And this is revealed in the last few pages of the book, and my mind was blown. I was like, are you serious?
Before we get into that, let's keep going through the characters.
Alright, now Shannon, Meg's best friend, quote-unquote best friend. She's like second or first best friend, right? What's the real deal here?
Who ranks best friends?
Ellen is also referred to as Meg's best friend throughout the book, but so is Shannon. So she has two besties. They were like a trio.
But one stayed in Shadyside and one didn't. So Shannon is, her best friend that's still in Shadyside. She has two brothers. One's Mike, who's her half-brother, who goes to some private school, and then one is Evan, the person who gets killed in the prologue. She's supposed to look like Molly Ringwald.
There's a lot of comparisons going on here. It seems to be a continuing theme.
I wonder, because I know for the reprinted books for the new girl, how Cory and Lisa didn't like Star Trek, so for the recent reprint of it, it was actually Lord of the Rings.
Really?
Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to figure out if the actresses these characters are compared to are changed for a more modern.
Why is R.L. Stein hating
on geek culture?
Really? I don't know. That's a question for the ages. Anyway.
Evan's death has affected her and her family. Evan happened to be dating Ellen, who was part of that threesome of Meg and Shannon. And now, after Evan's death, I think it was a month later, she upped and moved away from Shadyside. And now she's actually back in Shadyside visiting her aunt. And that is what the premise of the surprise party is. Meg wants to throw the surprise party for Ellen.
And you know what? Shannon is on the suspects list. At first, you kind of believe it because she doesn't want the party to happen. And at first, the weird phone calls that Megs are getting are like, you shouldn't have the party. You won't like what happens if you do. It's not that threatening. Maybe Shannon could pull that off. It's actually explicitly said that Meg couldn't tell if it was a man or woman that made the call. And so Meg confronts Shannon and says like, hey, are you the person that's making all these calls? In the lunchroom. It was terrible. She has the worst lunch. It was like this styrofoam
mac and cheese.
She can't tell if it's mac and cheese because she can't distinguish any macaronis in there. But it's orange. It doesn't taste quite like cheese.
But I love that this girl says that she brings a lunch and she buys a lunch.
Just in case.
So what happens during that lunch is that she decides that she needs to eat her bag lunch instead because the school lunch is so crappy.
And this goes back to something that I'm gonna have to mention right now. Is the fact that I was completely wrong about Cory and Lisa. The first thing I said was, they wouldn't be in this book.
And I said you were wrong.
And you were right. They were major characters in this book. And I was completely wrong. And then the second thing is, I said Cory and Lisa would be great together, and they weren't. They're like in a really bad relationship right now.
She gets abusive at one point.
Yeah, it's not good.
She starts hitting him.
Yeah.
And he just laughs it off. And Cory's late to every single one of their dates, or he just forgets about their dates.
Every single one. It's really a bad situation there. The reason I'm mentioning this right now is that
why are you mentioning this right now? Is it... What were we talking about? You can banter. Come on, a better podcaster will be able to pull it all together. So we were talking about the lunch and why she had to eat her brought from home lunch.
Oh, okay, yeah. And so the reason we're talking about this right now is the fact that actually, Meg is friends with Lisa. And Meg went over to Lisa's house, had a chat with Lisa, and Lisa said, hey, why don't you just confront Shannon about her being on your list of suspects? Meg said, I didn't come here for good advice. I just came here to complain. But sometimes that good advice seeps into our brains and causes us to make bad decisions. And so Meg makes a bad decision. She comes to the lunchroom, confronts Shannon, and says, hey, are you the one that threatening me notes and calling me on the phone and
tried to run run me over.
And Shannon says,
"The fuck is wrong with you?" And the best part of that scene is first part of Meg's inner dialogue was, "She must be guilty because she's so angry at me." Like, yes, wouldn't you be?
Right, and so what happens inevitably is Shannon's got nothing to do with this. She's really pissed off. She just marches off, and then Megan realizes, oh my god, I'm an idiot. What have I done? She looks at her lunch. It's mac and cheese product. She's like, you know what, screw this. I got my own backup lunch. She opens it up and it's blood.
It's actually red paint.
She realizes later, but it looks like blood. Which character are we on now? We're on Evan.
He's dead.
Evan is dead. Evan gets murdered with a shotgun, but we don't find out exactly how until the very end. We do get a scene of Evan in the middle of the book, and he ends up actually being a complete jerk.
Evan is kind of a crazy guy. I mean, he rear ends a truck while driving, and then when Shannon and Tony are joking about it, he's playing pool with Tony in this scene. So he takes his pool cue and starts trying to beat Tony up with it. They end up fencing, and somehow he manages to clobber Tony over the head. Tony has a head injury, he's bleeding, and the only thing that Evan can think about is, wow, I guess I hit him so hard, my pool cue got cracked, and that's all he cares about.
It's really awkward because Tony really admires Evan, and he seems to really like the guy, and Evan, in the one scene where you see him alive, comes off as a real big jerk. He flies off the handle, becomes violent, and he beats the crap out of Tony. Tony has to get stitches in the hospital.
And it wasn't over anything major. They were just joking around as friends do, and he completely lost it.
It was pretty intense. So, honestly, in this book, you don't feel bad that Evan died. Evan was a jerk.
I wouldn't say that, but you do get one more scene with him later on, where you get his sort of part of his death sequence. Basically, Ellen is telling Evan that she wants to break up with him, and for some reason he has his rifle.
Yeah, that's weird.
And then he's trying to shoot Tony and Ellen. Tony and Ellen are cheating on their respective boyfriend-girlfriend. Tony's cheating on Meg with Ellen, and Ellen's cheating on Evan with Tony. But that's still not a reason to shotgun people.
And Meg doesn't know any of this. She's clueless.
Everyone keeps saying that Meg is just so simple and innocent and doesn't understand things.
And the most guilty party here is Tony. Tony keeps saying that Megan must be a very stupid person. He really says that a lot.
Yeah, because Tony's the one that doesn't want the party. You get part of his inner monologue. And a lot of it is thinking about whether he should kill Meg or not.
Meg is very close to being killed a lot of the book. It's amazing that she survives, and yet Meg's major failing here is that she is close to getting killed by her boyfriend, but her major success is that she doesn't get killed by her boyfriend because her boyfriend actually loves her. Every time he looks into her eyes, he sees that love in her eyes, and he just can't bring himself to do it. And that's what saves her in the end. Moving on
you get Brian.
Oh my god, Brian is actually one of the most interesting characters in this story, isn't he?
He's unique.
Yeah.
He's very different. He's the not D&D playing cousin of Meg.
Even though he's into wizards and dungeons, his master plan precipitates the resolution of the conflict in this story, don't you think?
Well, he had a master plan that he did with Ellen. They thought of it together.
Ellen and Mike.
Well, they kind of brought Mike into it. It wasn't his plan.
Right, but Mike, interestingly enough, Mike is Shannon's half-brother, and he looks exactly like Evan, the guy who got killed. He's basically an Evan clone, and that really brings about a plot point later on.
But why don't we talk about Dwayne first?
Oh my god, Dwayne is this crazy guy. So, he's described as not entirely stable. Just a big bully. He really bullies Shannon around.
I would say he was less bully and more rapey. He said a lot of really creepy comments about how she was basically going to be his.
He was not taking no for an answer, and it was really not acceptable.
When Dwayne kept harassing Shannon, one of the things that Meg says about him is, Dwayne's not good enough for Shannon. Dwayne's not even good enough for her dog. That's how lowly they think of this guy.
But this guy, spent a lot of effort, built up his body. He worked out a lot. He's been described as being 5 times the size of what he should be. Spent thousands of hours working out to get to the size that he is. He's like a giant meathead.
How do we know he's not using steroids and he's just not roid raging?
He might be, but
He's probably on steroids. That's why he's so off.
that could be it. He could be just on giant roid rage. If you read the prologue, Dwayne definitely had all the motive necessary to do the deed, but you're left wondering, how did it happen?
Dwayne is the murderer.
Absolutely.
He's the one who shoots Evan.
It's interesting because he's on Meg's list of suspects. He's on my list of suspects as well, and you have reason to believe why he might want to do this. But you also have reason Tony might want to do this, and so there's a conflict between the two of them as the prime suspects, and that gets materialized in an interaction between the two of them. This is a very interesting interaction though, because Tony actually plays basketball with Dwayne, and then when Dwayne suggests that, you know what, it was really convenient that Evan died because it really opened up a lot of avenues for me. Tony got really upset. Why don't we talk about Cory, Lisa, David, and Arnie? Now, these are the characters that I said would not come back.
I don't know why you thought that.
Okay, so Anna was completely right, and I was totally wrong. I said, oh, I don't think they're gonna come back. And it turns out that we see Cory and Lisa in the first chapter.
Can I ask you why you didn't think they'd be coming back?
I mean, I thought this would be a more episodic type of book series. Turns out it was less episodic than I thought.
But episodic TV shows still have the same background characters.
Cory and Lisa are together still, many months later. So from that point, I was actually correct from my previous argument. But from another standpoint, I was wrong because their relationship is not very good. Cory is terrible at keeping the schedule and picking her up on time for their dates. And Lisa, on the flip side, is always very combative with Cory. The relationship is not ideal, maybe not going to last. And so, even though they've gone steady for a few months, it seems in doubt whether or not they're going to actually be around. From that respect, Anna had a good insight there.
There was a scene that I thought really nailed my point home. Meg and Lisa are hanging out, and Meg basically says, it's going to be a while before Cory stops taking you for granted, because you did grow up next door to each other. It's all your fault for letting him treat you like this. And I thought that was my point in the first book, that Cory never saw Lisa as anything but the girl next door and a friend. So why would he suddenly change his behavior and actions toward her as a partner or boyfriend?
Right. And now that we've covered Cory and Lisa, David and Arnie. David is still a really chill dude, and Arnie...
He passed out drunk at the party.
He's passed out drunk on the couch. That's his only scene in the book. Why am I not surprised?
Can we talk about Meg's parents?
Oh, the parental units are finally doing their parental duty.
I mean, there's the scene where Tony and Brian are missing. Apparently they supposedly went to Fear Street Woods to play Wizards and Dungeons together, and they don't come back. So Tony's dad calls Meg and asks if she knows where they are. She says, I don't know. So he's like, well, I'm gonna call the police. And Meg goes, oh my god, I know where they usually play Wizards and Dungeons. I know where Dwayne and Brian play. I need to go to Fear Street Woods.
The
so
cave.
So she wants to get out of the house, and as she's leaving the house, she knocks over a lamp. Her parents are like, where the hell are you going? She goes, they're missing. I know where they might be. I have to go. And the dad's just like, you know what? I'm gonna go with you because there's no way you're going by yourself. And then when they get there, she wants to go into the woods, and he goes, I'm gonna go in with you.
Best dad ever. Honestly, having read 2 Fear Street books, this dad is way better than Cory's dad.
And then there's a funny scene with her mom where she's basically pretending to write her psych paper, and her mom goes interrupts, like, how's that paper go? And she basically goes, well, it was going great until you ruined my train of thought. And her mom's basically like, well, maybe you should stop thinking with the caboose.
I gotta tell you guys, it took me a couple seconds to figure that one out. It was good after 10 seconds where I was like, oh, I get it. The caboose is the back of the train and her train of thought was derailed. I'm a little slow.
Anyway, so she had great parents.
Yeah, no, her parents are great. Her dad, her mom are looking out for her, and it's really good. We have to talk about one more character here, and this is Sookie. She is going to be in the next book.
So that's what Serge thinks.
Yeah, come on. I know this because she's described as having the spiky, bleached blonde hair. And I looked at the cover of the next book, and guess what? There's a girl with a spiky, bleached blonde hair. Now that I've learned my lesson with Lisa and Cory, I know that there's some continuation between the 2 books. So we're expecting some Sookie in the next book for sure.
Alright, is there anything in the plot that we want to hit some more? So we basically give the gist, right? why Dwayne wanted to date Shannon, but her brother Evan was totally not okay with that. Dwayne kills Evan. But the whole thing is, Ellen was telling Evan that she was going to break up with him because she was going to be with Tony. For some reason, Evan has his rifle, so they get in a pulling match with the rifle, and then the rifle goes off, and Evan falls, and Tony's like, holy shit, he's dead, I killed him. And then Brian, who happens to be playing Wizards and Dungeons in the woods at the time, runs over because he hears a gunshot, and they all are just staring at Evan lying there going, oh my god, we killed him. And Tony's like, listen, I'll kill you two if you don't let me take the blame. It's my fault he's dead. And then the two of them are like, oh my god, and Ellen and Brian run off, find help, and Tony's just like in his own world, and he runs off. And then Dwayne, who is playing Wizards and Dungeons with Brian, comes over. He realizes that Evan's not dead. Evan just hit his head against a rock. He could be revived, but he takes the rifle and then kills him.
He murders Evan at that point. And this is the point where it departs from the deeper analysis that I have, because I think this book really follows very closely the plot of Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Obviously, Tony is Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov ends up he channels the guilt of his murder into a feeling of superiority, and then he tries to cover it up. It is Crime and Punishment in and of its essence, and yet what transpires in the story, R.L. Stine takes it to another level where he takes Dwayne and makes him the actual murderer. We have a Raskolnikov character in Tony, and we have a Sonia character in Meg, and yet she's so much more than Sonia in every way. And we need to go back into her survival scene, because that was the highlight of the book for me. But anyway, going back, we have Raskolnikov and Tonya, Sonia and Megan, and what R.L. Stine does is he takes Crime and Punishment and he just throws in the wild card of Dwayne. And it's amazing because Dwayne is the actual real murderer, but Raskolnikov goes through all the same, the fear, the anguish, taking another life, even though he's not the one that actually did it, and trying to cover it up. And there's something really amazing about this. It turns out that he needs some major psychiatric help after this, and Dwayne probably goes to prison. But it's really a modern Crime and Punishment.
What happens is they have the party, and at the party is where everything comes to a head. I mean, we're skipping the whole thing where Tony and Brian are in the woods. Since Brian and Ellen both think that Tony is the murderer, there's this whole thing where Tony didn't want Ellen and Brian and all these people to tell everyone that he was the murderer, and at one point beats Brian up in the woods so Brian won't talk. And that's the scene where Meg and her dad are searching the woods for where they are. Brian's horrifically injured, wrapped up in gauze, and Meg goes to visit him. He's ranting and raving about how he's a wizard level 3, but he can't tell her anything because she can't know, but when he becomes a level 4 wizard she'll know. And he sounds a little crazy.
He's selling it.
He's really selling it. So then you have the party. Tony at this point thinks that Meg knows. He's tried to kill her in the ravine. He tried to push her off the romance spot for teenagers, but then looking at her eyes, he just couldn't do it. So he decides to come to this party with a gun, and he decides that if Ellen or Brian say anything, he's gonna shoot them.
At this point, you already think that Tony is the culprit.
There's nothing dissuading you from thinking that.
Yeah, exactly. All of your previous suspicions are confirmed at this point because he has admitted to it. And yet, back in your mind, maybe you think, why did Dwayne look so suspicious? Why? Because Tony is obviously the murderer, so why is Dwayne still looking so suspicious? It's weird.
Did Dwayne ever look suspicious to you?
Absolutely. Because if you look back at the prologue, and you look at the conversation that he had with Tony when they were playing basketball, and you link those two together and you go wow, Dwayne looks really suspicious. Why? It doesn't make any sense. What's going on? And then Tony becomes the prime suspect, and we really don't see it coming. And honestly, guys, this is where Meg comes into her own.
During the party, Brian comes in, he goes, I am wizard level 4, and I will bring back Evan. He and Ellen had this plan that they were gonna get Tony to confess at that party. So they called Mike to come back, pretend to be Evan, to scare Tony into confessing. Which is a pretty cool plan. So, Brian comes in, he's all wizarding, and everyone's like, what the hell? And it totally gets Tony. He's just okay, let me tell you. And then you get this almost farcical type thing where every time he's about to say that he's the murderer, something would happen.
Right.
The lights would go off and they'd be like, oh my god, the lights are off. He's like, no, listen, the lights are off, but, and then something else would happen.
But then he gets shot.
And you're just like, what?
Because he's the one holding the gun.
It's Dwayne.
Obviously.
And then everyone's just like, what the hell's going on? He was like, nope, it was me. And he takes Ellen hostage.
And this is Meg's Matrix moment, because he's actually pointing the gun at her, and then he gets distracted, and she uses that moment to slip away, and she sneaks behind multiple people, and she's thinking, I can get the gun away from him, and I can save everybody. And she continues to sneak behind. She knows what his escape pathway is. It's the door out of the room, and she gets herself into that door before he backs out of that door, and she reaches for his gun, and unfortunately, it's just as he turns around.
And she gets herself taken hostage too.
But she really tried really hard. She did her best to rescue the surprise party.
She was trying to rescue her friend more than the surprise party.
I mean, it was her surprise party. She didn't want it to become a complete failure.
But she became the hero later because he takes them to another part of this mansion. His theory is, everyone's going to look for us outside, but we're going to stay here. And then Meg realizes, there's a few times where he pretends to shoot them, and she goes, not all these shots are going to be pretend shots, and we need to find a way out of here. So she thinks of a plan. And when she was a little kid, she played this game with Shannon and Ellen called Eek a Mouse. Basically, they would just scream Eek a Mouse and then scream at the top of their lungs. And the game was to see who could be louder or higher.
By the way, this was introduced earlier in the book.
When they have a really awkward hangout, the three of them. They have nothing to talk about except their childhood.
It was really sad, but you are already aware that this is a link between the two of them.
During a moment where Dwayne is distracted, Meg just says, Eek a Mouse. And Ellen gets it. When she gets the go sign from Meg, she basically does Eek a Mouse and screams. And that freaks Dwayne out because what the hell is that even? And they take this opportunity, knock him out. His teeth fly out of his mouth.
Two of his teeth.
This is the greatest scene ever.
It's beautiful.
You go, girls.
No, this is described as an epic detail where Meg grabs a copper pan from the wall. It's heavier than she thinks it is. She smacks it into his head. Really smacks it as hard as she can. And this girl is not messing around. Two of his teeth come flying out. Blood is spurting out of his mouth. I mean, he is knocked out cold. She wanted to, teach him a lesson, but the lesson was heavier than she initially anticipated. And we are satisfied as a reader. The other kids already called the cops. They knew the party was messed up. The cops are already there. They heard the mouse scream. Everybody's already rushing down what's going on? There it is. Two girls standing above this
roided
out guy. Two of his teeth are missing. He is done because Meg is the most epic character in Fear Street so far. You do not mess with Meg.
What do you think of the book adding to the mythos of Fear Street? Not about the murders, but the birds.
Birds avoiding the Fear Street woods is a scientific fact, according to a paragraph in this book.
Didn't leading scientists from major universities from all over the country go to the Fear Street woods to examine why there were no birds in the woods?
And they couldn't find the answer. That's really strange. And I think that goes back to my earlier point of unobtainium being buried deep underground. This town, some major corporation trying to spread scary stories to scare people away from Fear Street, get them to sell their properties, move away so they could mine the resource.
And they described Fear Street, all the street lights were off, and a lot of the homes were dark as if no one lived there. Do you think the Fear Street thing, the company started the rumors trying to get everyone to sell, but for some reason it's not happening, and instead the locals have just embraced this whole crazy story and decided to do all their dirty deeds at Fear Street?
Right, because you think about the local real estate developer, Meg's dad. He's actually trying to spice up the mansion that's on Fear Street, right on the Fear Street woods. Maybe they're trying to turn this into a tourist attraction, so they don't care. And so this whole horror thing is backfired big time on the big corporation that's trying to mine the whatever resource out from underneath. But that's actually still what's causing the birds from flocking towards those woods. Because that's a fact. A apparently. And the university scientists definitely wanted us to know that. Now, the weird thing was, I made 2 predictions. I said Cory and Lisa would not appear, and I was wrong. And I said the Guardians of Fear Street would appear, and I was also wrong about that.
There was no real interaction with Fear Street.
The Guardians of Fear Street did not show up whatsoever, and so both of my predictions for the future episode were completely wrong, and I admit that I was woefully unprepared for what would happen next.
I feel like this book held up over time a lot better than the last book. Aside from calling information, getting a phone number.
Which happened again.
Yeah, which happened again. There was nothing that really stood out.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, I also procrastinated on writing papers.
Oh my god.
So that's a universal thing. That will be like that till the end of time.
Honestly, I thought this book was better than the previous book. The female point of view was interesting. The male point of view from last time, the guy was an idiot. And once again, in this book, he was portrayed as an idiot. The girl was actually kind of smart. I really enjoyed it much more than the previous book.
Oh yeah, I enjoyed it too. Because I felt like the prologue gave something away in this book, but there were still enough twists and turns that made me go, okay, that's cool.
It was pretty nuts.
Whereas for the last book, it was like, but I know this. This is quite obvious what's happening. Or maybe I just was not paying enough attention.
I have to mention one bit. So, when Brian makes this big scene at the end, and he says, I can bring Evan back from the dead, and Evan's half-brother walks back, and he looks just like Evan, I have to say, I fell for it for a split second.
Do you really think he reanimated his corpse?
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? I was really hoping that, Fear Street would bring a little bit of supernatural.
Yeah, they're really building Fear Street up into this really crazy thing. We got an interesting ride of a murder mystery, but not so much a supernatural.
Exactly. It was a Sherlock Holmes murder mystery. Nothing supernatural whatsoever. I give it a 3. Definitely better than the
3
previous
out
book.
of 5 bags of red paint.
3 out of 5 brown paper bag of red paint.
Wouldn't it have leaked through? What viscous paint was this? Because blood would leak through a paper bag.
But maybe not paint?
Yeah, I think I would give this book a 3. I gave the last book a 2, so.
Okay, now thinking about the next book.
Yes, it's called The Overnight.
There are a bunch of kids that are stupid enough to make an overnight sleepover in the Fear Street woods.
So, judging this book based on its cover,
we know that Sookie is going to be in this book.
They shared her terrible secret, but could they get away with murder? There's 6 people on the cover. They're sitting around a campfire in, I'm going to guess, the woods of Fear Street, right?
Fear Street Woods.
Yeah, and we think one of them's Sookie, and they shared let's say they shared Sookie's terrible secret. What's her terrible secret? And then are they gonna murder someone? Why do they look so scared? Because they're in the woods? Or they've committed murder?
Is Cory and Lisa one of them?
Are they still together?
Maybe.
Well, the murder weapon for this book was a rifle. The one they were trying to use in the first book was a letter opener. What's the murder weapon in the overnight?
The murder weapon in the first book was a shove down the stairs.
It was a shove down the stairs. But at the end, she wanted to use the letter opener.
She wanted to, but she didn't get
so
down.
Shove down the stairs, attempt with letter opener, rifle. What's the overnight?
Overnight would be a rifle to the face.
I would say they would use one of the branches from the trees and bludgeon someone. Alright, prediction set.
Alright guys, thanks for listening. Peace.
Thanks for listening to another thrilling episode of RetRead Podcast.
If you like what you hear, give us a shout out.
If not, let us know why in the comments.
Don't forget to rate, review, comment, share, like, and subscribe.
You can follow us at RetRead Podcast on Twitter and Facebook.
Or send suggestions or fan mail to red.read.podcast@gmail.com.
Until next time.
Peace!